This is WPSL Port St. Lucie, the talk of the Treasure Coast.
From Port St. Lucie to Pango Pango, this is Ask a Rabbi on WPSL.
And this is Rabbi Shafir Loeb of Congregation Eitz Chayim, your Jewish home on the Treasure Coast in Port St. Lucie. And this is getting to be the tail end of Pesach. We are getting closer and closer to the end of it. And I brought in... I often bring in snacks, and yes, I brought in some charoset, which we had, of course, for the Seder, and I'm going to talk a little bit about it for those who are on Facebook. Here it is. You can see it.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. I just filled the studio with
I was going to say, it smells wonderful.
Yeah. There's a definite fruity smell to it.
Oh, yeah.
So there's many different traditional charosot. There are many different varieties of it, and it
all
depends
fruits?
on your family. Yeah, different. So Europeans tend to mix apples, walnuts, and grape juice.
Okay.
And some grind it, some chop it, some do this, some do that. The object of it is to put something on the matzah, something on the bitter herb during the Seder to sweeten it. And it's supposed to look something like mortar, and if you look at it, it's dark. If you make it with predominantly apples, of course, they brown, and then they have that mortar-y kind of look. It's
right.
supposed to be thick. There's a couple of videos out there with people using it with a little paver, putting matzah together, making little matzah houses. And things like that. So
really?
Yeah.
Okay.
So
yeah, that's cool.
The other thing that I'll tell you about it is that the Sephardi or the Spanish Jews tend to have figs and dates and almonds and
wait a minute.
A little more Eastern Mediterranean kind of fruits.
Figs, dates, and almonds.
Yeah.
Coachella Valley of California.
Yeah, and raisins.
Figs, dates, and almonds and raisins.
Yeah, the things that grow in that climate, because that would have been what the Spanish Jews in their expulsion of Spain used. And so I tend to call this charoset ashkefardik.
Okay.
Because it's got both the apples and the walnuts, and I throw in pecans, and it's got figs and dates and raisins, and it's apricots, and as was noted to me during our Seder, on page 16 of our Haggadah, it gives us the recipe explaining that charoset comes from the Song of Songs, where the different fruits and spices are talked about.
Oh, okay. That's really cool.
Yeah, Song of Songs gives it, your breath is as sweet as apricots, your kisses are sweeter than wine, come join me for almonds, and etc. So that the ingredients are there, and all of those are in this charoset, as I jokingly.
Actually sounds romantic, but
yeah. Well, it's supposed to be in Song of Songs.
Oh, okay.
All right. So, and so there's a story behind it, right? Mortar. I mean, why would you eat mortar, and why would it be sweet? That's kind of a strange thing. Obviously, part of being sweet gets you to eat it, and there's a great big value if you're eating matzah to eating a fruit, anything, because the body appreciates the fiber. I'll leave it at that.
Yeah, no,
right.
that makes sense.
So there's an organic reason for it, but there's also a wonderful midrash or story, a maisa, as they say, a story about it, which is that when the Egyptians were making life miserable for the men working on building the cities and whatever it is that they built, that the women would come, because the men, when they would get home, would be too tired and they'd flop down and be done until they got up in the morning to go back to work. And it is said that the women would fix a tasty, yummy, energetic meal, which of course, all the sugars in the fruit would tend to be, and take it to their husbands during their lunch break. And
Yes.
amazingly, each one was able to find their own little bush or tree. And so the birth rate didn't go down. We know that there was an Egyptian interest in birth rate because they were killing the males. Right?
Oh,
Yeah.
That's nothing to laugh about.
No,
Oh,
it was a form of genocide.
wow.
The old fifth column argument, the Israelites might side with somebody from the outside because they're not really Egyptian. Yeah, that's not a new.
They were sickos all the way back then, huh?
All the way back then. Yeah. So that's definitely recorded in the book of Exodus that Pharaoh was afraid because the Israelites were too numerous and didn't look Egyptian. So, why is it that we spend so much of our time and our energy worrying about what people look like? That's a human thing. We are visual creatures. We take in a ton of information, much more information visually than we do any other way. And we've got things like seeing is believing.
Yeah,
Right?
sure.
See it with my own eyes.
Mhm.
We don't usually say I hear it with my own ears, but we say I see it with my own eyes. We are visual creatures, and so things that appear different catch our attention. What are the things that appear different? Height can appear different. Obviously, skin color, hair color, eye color, features. Those are things that can make people appear to be different. We joked a little bit about it last week when I said, funny you don't look Jewish, about the European Jew who comes into the Chinese synagogue. And it's true, because Jews do tend to look like wherever that group is living, because there has and always will be intermarriage to whoever's local, and when you do that, the gene pools mix, and it's that's not a bad thing. That helps prevent inbreeding.
I had bunches of interns along the way, and several happened to be Jewish. And 2 or 3 of them married outside the religion. How does that help the Jewish religion?
Well, it doesn't help the Jewish religion per se. It depends on whether or not that family is raised Jewish or not. And there's some disagreement and differences among the different kinds of Judaism as to what's acceptable and what's not, and we can go into the historical reasons for some of those. Where it helps is obviously if you bring somebody in to the group and you then have new genes in the children, you create genetic vigor.
Okay, yeah,
genetic vigor.
I get that, yep.
And, long term, it has led to some more blending of ideas, between,
okay.
I don't want to give up the Christmas tree, so let's have a Hanukkah bush.
Yeah, yes.
I'm sorry, that's a Christmas tree with a ch in front of it instead of a k.
I'll never forget the first time I saw that at Cantor's Deli in Beverly Hills. I'm dying laughing. Yeah, but, everything was blue on it,
yeah.
Oh, yeah,
Uh-huh.
yeah.
And I'll be the first one to say they're pretty. Christmas trees are pretty. And they were done to brighten up the darkness of the winter Yule season in Europe, because they didn't decorate Christmas trees in Israel. Now they do, because they cut trees, and they actually will give them out to Christians.
Really?
Yeah, because they don't want people going into the forest and cutting on their own. So the government pre-cuts trees, and Christians can sign up for them.
Like Christmas tree lots or something like that.
Yeah, well, that's what they do.
Yeah.
They
Wow.
Yeah.
I didn't know that.
Yeah. So, do things help and not help? Absolutely. Everything has a silver lining. Everything has a silver lining. Look at how much technology and virtual teams have taken a leap forward in COVID. Right? It wouldn't have happened without the shutdowns, without the teams working remotely.
Sure.
I'm not suggesting that we have a pandemic in order to advance technologically. That's not what I'm saying. But everything has benefits associated with it, even if something is negative. So
yeah, the Zoom technology has just gotten better and better almost by the week. Yeah.
All right. So there's this amalgam that occurs. And genetically, it's a good idea every once in a while to mix up the gene pool for everybody. But it also means that features change and body shapes change and skin color changes and all of these other wonderful things that occur within the human race, of which there is one kind, folks. There's one race. Right? God made us all. That's why religions start with stories of Adam and Eve or a similar origin story. It always starts out with one couple giving birth in some way to humans. And it doesn't matter what tradition even indigenous religions do that. And there's a reason. It's to remind us that we are all connected. No matter how the various Homo sapiens, etc., and other primates at one time blended or didn't.
You mentioned that our elders, if you will, and which I would in America with the American Indians, they seem to be more tuned in to all of that, back in the day, if you will.
So the case of the American Indian is a very interesting one. The original American Indian spirituality, not the church. The church
No. Yeah, I got
the current Indian church is a kind of, again, an amalgam. It's trying to blend things. But the original Indian religions, of which there were many, there's 600 different nations recognized.
Yeah, the Aleutians had their own.
Everybody's got slightly different stories. And if you cut in through South America and then Central and South America, you pick up the Fang deity and all of that.
Aztecs and all the other stuff, yeah.
And, the Virgin of Guadalupe is earlier than Christianity coming to the American Indians or the Mexican Indians.
Whoa, wait a minute, back up. What?
The Virgin of Guadalupe is a pagan site. And pagan is not a bad thing, folks. Pagan religions are more nature-based, more spiritual-based religions. Yeah, they're more organic, if you will, dealing with, like in a lot of American Indian, it talks about Father Sky and Mother Earth.
Mm-hmm.
Right, and you can understand the illusion because the rain comes and the earth gives of her seed, the seeds that are planted in the earth that grow forth. And, I did it on my Torah moment yesterday. I cut into one of these small mangoes. I've got these little tiny.
Yeah, that's a little baby mango there.
I actually, one of the ones that I cut yesterday was a whole inch. It was a little tiny guy. And then one was bigger than this. They were both soft and they felt ripe, but they're not anywhere near ripe. They're mostly rotting. But if you look inside, there's a wonderful little seed with an umbilical cord and all of that. And I showed that I didn't bring a knife to cut it here today. So.
Huh. Okay.
But mango season is coming. The mangoes are little tiny things on the trees. And so this is a natural abortion, if you will. It's one that came off the tree and never will be an adult mango. There's not enough nutrition in the fruit to raise the seed.
Okay, this Lady of Guadalupe thing is going to bother me all day.
You remember her, right?
Oh, sure.
Right?
Yeah.
Right, the Virgin of Guadalupe.
Sure.
La Reina de Mexico. Let's get my genders correct. Right, and, it's funny because when I first went to Tucson, I'm looking at all the houses, and I'm like, why are there so many shrines in front yards?
Yeah.
And it wasn't until later that I realized it was the Virgin of Guadalupe with her teal-colored background and all of the symbology. But, of course, the story of the Virgin of Guadalupe is that Juan went to the bishop in Mexico City and asked to have a church to honor her, to have the funding for it. And he initially refused because it was a pagan.
Wow.
Right, it was a pagan character. And then Juan came back with the apron of roses or flowers or whatever it was, and when he opened the apron, the bishop saw whatever he saw that convinced him that the Virgin of Guadalupe is synonymous with a different virgin.
Whoa.
Okay, and so he agreed to allow the church to be built at that site. And there's wonderful artwork there now, but it's still an ancient Indian holy area. And that was one of the things. It's when Christian missionaries came to the U.S., they did not look kindly upon any indigenous people that they found anywhere. Hispaniola is a famous case of enslaving and slaughtering thousands and obliterating the indigenous population. And they did that kind of thing in a lot of places. They basically caused the indigenous people to help build the missions. And, the idea of, oh, they're savages, right? Not bothering to learn what their religious practices were and what their religious teachings were. And just coming in with this assumption that Christianity was somehow better, etc. And
there's some crazy stories about how vicious some of the Jesuit priests were back in those days.
There's some really horrible stories in history of just being very, very cruel. And the excuse was that they had no soul. They're savages, right? There's something less than human. And over time that changes when there's a desire to fill the church and put people in there. And so some of the southwestern...
And collection plates. Oh, no, I'm sorry.
Some of the southwestern... Well, as more and more Indian nations were moved on to assorted reservations, it became the population.
Ooh.
Yeah. Right, and so there's this really troubled history in the Spanish Catholic mixing of the conquistador, who represents death, teaching this religion of eternal life. There's some real conflicts in some of those early stories. However, some of it, eventually, as often happens, Christianity takes root. And so there are some cases where symbols of indigenous religion get renamed into John and Peter or Stephen or some Christian saint and put on the front of the church. And the idea being that if you put them on the church, that the Native Americans will come in because they see the symbol. And so there's this interesting amalgam and blending. And it varies depending on where Christianity goes. Very, very different. The African Christian traditions, and this tradition and that tradition, because people historically blend their local culture and religious traditions with the incoming Christianity. And so Christianity is very different depending on where it is in the world. Same is true with Buddhism. Right, with everything that travels around the world changes, and both the religion and the people change to accommodate and blend it. It's not that somebody sits down normally, although I do believe that Constantine did some of that, or had people do that, kind of intentionally blended, but over time things blend.
Interesting you mentioned the pagan possibilities, and looking all the way back to the Indians there. Carol and I climbed the pyramids down in Mexico City. Mm-hmm. And you get to the top, there's something really spiritual up there. And I can't put my finger on it. It's certainly not religious per se, but there's something spiritual.
There is. Well, and there's something spiritual to Sabino Canyon in Tucson.
Oh, yeah.
Right? You look at, it's just spectacular. Mount Lemmon. It's not hard to touch God on a mountain.
Yeah.
And and that's what the
Yeah.
Tower of Babel story is about. Do we build a mountain? Do we build it, or do we find it on the natural?
Ooh.
Yeah. And of course the tower doesn't work,
Yeah.
right? And so the rule is, you go and find it in nature. That's what that story's about. It's the battle of the builders to God and the finders, the seekers. Who does what? It's the undercurrent in the story. And, so when I say things like that, that's not to minimize the holiness or the power of the scripture. But I'm going to come back and say something I've said other times. God is not Jewish, Christian, Muslim, Buddhist, Hindu, Taoist. God is God. God is the creator. God is the source of life. We choose different ways of practicing
Right.
in order to have our God experiences. And, that's what it's all about. And right, in the Yaqui tribe, the Yaqui Nation is going to have their Yaqui Easter, right, this weekend. And I think it's this weekend, I'm not sure. But they have their traditions. And stuff gets blended interestingly. So, yeah.
Yeah, you look at the Yaquis, the Apaches, obviously the Navajos, and where we were, it's a new name now, but the old Papago tribe, totally different.
Tohono O'odham.
Tohono O'odham. Okay. Wow. I'm glad I didn't have to say that back then.
And the Hopi and
Hopis,
and
yeah.
Seminole and Iroquois. There's just tons of nations out there.
Mm-hmm. But what amazed me is that you had all of those different tribes in just one state of Arizona, and
Not by their choice.
In parts of New Mexico. Well, yeah, you're right.
Not by their choice,
Yeah.
for the most part.
No,
I mean,
I get
there
it.
certainly were people who lived there, different tribes.
Yeah.
Right, but let's give them the most hospitable land, Arizona. Yeah.
Yeah. Arid desert land.
Yeah.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
And nowhere are the reservations prime real estate, unfortunately.
Yeah.
But American Indians were driven to them. And it's a sad part of our history. And,
You're so right. I mean,
Yeah.
you just think some of the worst deserts in the world is home to some of our most wonderful tribes.
Yeah. And we're still not honoring recent treaties. We're still not giving them COVID fighting support the way it should be. It's the trail of tears continues.
I saw a story out of University of Arizona Hospital where they had a group of doctors that apparently the state of Arizona would not fund this. Somehow, some way, they got a bunch of COVID medicine and they just shot straight up to Navajo and were helping them. It's like, gosh, this persecution, it continues.
It does. It does.
And it's so stupid.
And for the most part, we ignore it. It's kind of interesting. I was looking at, there was an article on one of the news sites, and it was talking about the towns on the pipeline that are going to suffer because President Biden didn't sign the continuing permit for the pipeline. At the same time, I don't see many articles about how the pipeline is destroying the American Indian towns, giving them lousy water when they had sweet water, and just damaging their lifestyle all over the place, and tramping across their holy lands. We really don't have a good history of being respectful of Native American, of American Indian Holy Land. One of the better stories along that line is the story of Kitt Peak, to the southwest of Tucson.
Observatory.
The observatory, which is starting to be worthless, at least the visual one, because even Tucson with its dark sky,
too much light.
Yeah. The city's getting too big, and as it mushrooms out and creeps out of the valley, it's polluting the visual. But they do still have radio and other kinds of equipment up there. But to negotiate to put the observatory on holy ground was one of the better attempts at doing that. And, they do honor the fact that it is in native land. Sometimes better, sometimes worse, but it's one of the better stories. And it's not great.
Mm-hmm.
So,
yeah.
But I can remember traveling up that little tiny road to get up to Kit. And I have to tell you, if you're in Tucson, make a reservation. You have to make a reservation to get out to Kit Peak at night. It is amazing, the stars that you see.
It's breathtaking.
It is breathtaking, the skies. And realize that at one time people saw that all over. The only other time I saw the sky like that was when actually my husband and I were flying in our little airplane, which was clear overhead. We had a low-wing airplane that had plexiglass on the overhead, and so we could look up. And we were coming between Harrisburg and Pittsburgh. We were over the Appalachian Mountains, and there's not a lot of light pollution there. And I remember looking up and going, "Oh my gosh, that's the Milky Way." Now I see why they call it Milky.
Wait a minute, you could see through the smog?
Well, there isn't that much there. Right?
Sorry about that.
And there wasn't much
resist.
light pollution, so we could actually see it. It was an absolutely spectacular sky.
You hear all these stories about pilots seeing all sorts of things up there. That it's really
it's a gorgeous world up there. Some of the best sights and memories that I have. There are some that I don't wish to repeat because they were interesting and beautiful, but not. There was one time when we had gone up to Toronto for one of my brother's second wedding. And my mother and I had flown. She got in a little airplane with me, and we flew across Lake Erie and up to Toronto Island, and we had to come back and clear customs coming back into the U.S. And I had picked, I think it was Buffalo, I want to say Buffalo, that we had chosen to come back into. And as we're coming back across the Great Lakes, of course, the Great Lakes are doing their wonderful thing, and there's thunderstorms all over the place.
Oh, no.
And Center says to us, "Well, I'm going to try to vector you around the worst of it." And I'm like, okay. And it was sunset, and it was absolutely gorgeous inside the caverns of the clouds. Okay, there were towering
Sounds
cumulus.
like a hurricane hunter.
It felt like that too. Let me tell you, for brief periods of time. But there were caverns inside these towering cumulus clouds, and they were all different shades of orange and purple, and it was spectacular inside there. And of course, it's before the cell phone, so I didn't get to take these wonderful pictures, but those scenes are etched in my memory. But also the turbulence coming in and out of those clouds is etched in my memory. And I think my mother was very, very glad to put 3 wheels down on the ground smoothly and in one piece. And we cleared customs and then flew on back to wherever it was I guess it was Pennsylvania that we were living in at the time.
So the message of that story, never fly into Buffalo.
No, ground controllers do their best. They're looking at radar, and in those days, radar wasn't anywhere near as good as it is now.
Sure.
And so they do a better job of vectoring you. But I was a little airplane, and it's people put too much faith. It's one of the things as a flight instructor I always cautioned my students to remember that the guy on the ground giving you the directions can only fall as far as his chair. From his chair to the ground. You in the airplane can fall a lot farther, and it hurts a lot more. Being as
my.
gentle as I can, right? You're the commander in your aircraft. You are responsible for safety. If the controller gives you an unsafe order or direction, you must challenge it. That's your responsibility. And, again, I can remember one time coming back from Harrisburg and being unable to hold altitude, advised center that I was not able to hold it. Fortunately, we were able to recover the small detail of carburetor icing, doing something I don't recommend for anybody called torching it. Not a good procedure, and it made a loud bang in the engine in the airplane. Let me tell you.
Is this like a backfire?
Yeah, kind of like a backfire, because you're dislodging the ice and it chunks on its way out.
God.
It's wonderful.
No.
But of course, once it did that, then the engine was able to develop full horsepower. We climbed back up to altitude, and I can remember telling Center, that we're back up at 3,000. He said, "Right, cleared to descend," and I'm like, "You turkey." You don't ever say that back on the air, but you sure hope that you click your mic into the off position before you say anything. But that was another case of, the farthest he can fall. And so my task was in the airplane to keep us safe. And I did the best I could with the situation that I had. And we did come through it safely. But there's a reason why there are not old, bold pilots. There are old pilots, there are bold pilots, but there are not old, bold pilots.
It was funny. We had a person in here, one of the VPs of Piper Aircraft last night on the IRSC show. And he had previously worked at Bell Helicopters. Mm-hmm. And I was joking with him about our pilot in San Diego, and then he worked with Carol at NBC in L.A., who used to have this, it was a scripted message for us the moment we got into the helicopter with him. This is what you will do if I die.
Yeah.
And it's like you kind of look at him. What does that mean? And he
because we're human.
Yeah, well,
right. There have been plenty of cases of people who bring in airplanes where the pilot has had a heart attack or something like that. Mm-hmm. It is important. If you typically fly light airplanes with somebody else, it's important for them to know how to land the airplane.
Wow. Yeah.
Have an instructor teach them. I'm not saying that you as a general pilot should begin to teach somebody, because instructors learn how to correct huge numbers of student errors, and you don't want your precious airplane being banged on the ground by somebody who doesn't know how to put it down gently. But it's a good idea to have an instructor at least teach them how to fly enough to land the airplane, not to necessarily get their license, but to be proficient enough for an emergency.
It was funny, the first time we flew into Grand Bahama, and you look at the end of the runway, there's all these wrecked planes down there, and you just think, oh, this is really a wonderful sight at an airport. But
yeah.
It's reality, though.
It is. Well, if you've got an airport where a bunch of people try to cowboy it in.
Yep.
There's,
That's going to happen.
It's that old, bold thing,
Yeah.
And pilot humor is filled with stuff like that. The story of the airplane coming in gear up and the tower screaming and yelling at them, your gear up, your gear up. And when the guy screeches to a skidding halt on the runway and the tower says, didn't you hear me warn you about the gear? He says, I couldn't hear anything over the alarm. Because people have these moments where they're just they're not at their best.
Couldn't hear over the alarm.
Yeah.
Oh, my goodness.
Yeah. Yeah, and then there's the other story that I like about things like that, shows the airplane upside down on the runway skidding to a halt, and coming out of it is a little caption from the instructor saying, now do you understand what you did wrong? Famous instructor lines here. Do you understand what you did wrong?
Then there's the case of Sully, who landed in the river.
Oh, that's an amazing job.
Oh, wow.
There are people in the history of whatevers that definitely deserve serious attaboys or attagirls for being able to do amazing things that keep people safe. That's one of the stories. The other story, and I don't remember the gentleman's name, was the fireman who led the people out of the monorail when Disney had the tire fire way back ages ago.
Yeah.
I can remember coming to Disney as a tire engineer back in the day, and trying to look at some of their stuff. And there are people who just in the moment have the presence of mind, the training, the skill, and just what it takes to get people out safely.
Mm-hmm.
And there are some amazing stories.
Well, and all of you who are pilots, there are very few hot doggers, if you will.
They don't last long.
Yeah. No,
Yeah. There's
right.
a very famous a picture that a lot of pilots have, and it's an airplane caught in a tree. And
oh no.
The caption on it is that aviation is not inherently dangerous, but it, like the sea, is unforgiving.
Oh, yeah.
You don't get many chances when you make mistakes. And so there's all kinds of little adages along those lines. We talk about things that money can't buy. Money can't buy the fuel you leave on the fuel truck. It can't buy the runway behind you. It can't buy the altitude above you. And it can't buy the pre-flight you didn't do. There's just safety things you just don't ignore, because when you need them, you can be the richest person in the world and it won't help you.
Preparation.
Yeah. There are I am extremely lucky. There are many times in my flying career where luck got me through, and not my skill and not my savvy. And I am lucky. It's not because I did everything right, because I didn't. But those events help teach me how important it is to do things right. And the times when I got myself in trouble were times that I didn't pay attention, or times that I didn't argue with the traffic controller in the right way to get what was safe for the airplane.
We knew a pilot in Los Angeles, flew for Continental, and he had a bad habit of not doing all of his pre-flight.
Yeah.
Until he had a moment between L.A. and Hawaii, and his lack of pre-flight hit at that point. He limped it into Honolulu, but that taught him a lesson.
Yeah, I can remember teaching my husband multi-engine flying, because I was the instructor when we met.
Oh wow! Okay,
yeah,
that's
cool.
I
I actually thought he was an FAA plant because he flew the airplane way too well for the hours in his logbook. But he's that kind of a pilot, and that kind of a driver in many ways. That he's just very smooth in the operation of equipment. And but the airplane had just undergone its inspection, and he did go through he was meticulous on the pre-flight. And we take off from Akron Municipal Airport, and I happen to glance out the wing, and there's this black streak coming out of the engine.
Oh no.
Going across the wing, and I'm like, this is not good. And I look at him and I say, okay, we're going to make this a short flight and go back in for a landing. And I said, you've got plenty of time to do it. Just be gentle.
Oh, wow.
And of course we did. We just turned around and came right back in and landed. And what we discovered was that on this particular airplane, the pre-flight did not include sliding your hand in and checking the oil cap to make sure that it was secured. Now, should it have happened during the maintenance? Absolutely. Somehow it got missed on that. No harm done, because we saw it, we came back in. Nothing got damaged except that the airplane had to be washed because of the oil skimming across the
So is that the
wing.
ground crew problem? Or?
The mechanics failed to tighten the top down, and because it wasn't in the checklist, he hadn't checked it. And so we
Wow.
wrote that in on the checklist from then on, that when you
Yeah,
go down the wings,
yeah.
you slide the hand in and make sure the oil cap's secure.
Wow.
Because, if somebody had been flying solo and hadn't checked, the only reason I looked out over the wing was not over the wing, it was to see if any other aircraft were coming in. It was just clearing the skies. And, no harm done.
Now, would he have been able to see that from his seat?
He says that he saw it, but I'm not entirely convinced. I'd have to sit in the airplane again to be sure. It was a Cessna 310. Those who fly 310s, you're welcome to call me. Call me at 772-340-1590 and let me know if the left seater can see the right wing oil gliding or not. Certainly he could if he looked over and out the window. Would he have just seen it on a gentle, look around? I don't know. I don't remember the geography of the cockpit, the geometry and geography, well enough to know what you do and don't see. Of course, he would have seen it shortly. The oil pressure would have given him some clues that there were problems, and waited long enough, and the engine would have seized. But but there would have been warnings long before that.
Yeah, the bells
would have
and
happened.
whistles.
I don't know how many bells there were, but there certainly would have been on the gauges some issues that engine was having a problem. And of course, that is one of the things that you practice when you qualify to fly multi-engine. Is what do you do when an engine fails? And there's several things that you want to do. You do what's called feathering the engine, which is to turn the blades into the wind so they don't cause this big windmilling disc. You want to create as little drag as possible on the engine that's not helping to fly the airplane. And, things like that. So, yeah, there's procedures, and that's why we practice them, because stuff happens. And it's the way to become an old pilot, which, was always one of my goals. So, and I don't fly now. I always preach that if you don't fly enough to stay current and safe, then you don't belong in the cockpit. And
There you go.
I am attempting to practice what I preach.
So how long has it been since you've flown an aircraft?
5 million years, it feels like. A while. We haven't flown since Ohio. So we've been out
That
of
is a
Ohio.
while.
Yeah, it's been a while.
Wow.
And, yeah. Basically stopped flying when we sold the airplane. Yeah. Because it's hard to get. It is much more expensive to rent than to fly your own if you fly a lot.
Well, just think, another, 5, 10 years, and they'll have the flying cars.
We've been
Just
looking
like
for
the
that.
Jetsons.
We've been looking for that for a long time. Right? There was a time when people said, everybody will have an airplane parked outside their car. Can you imagine how Florida drivers would do if they were Florida pilots?
Oh.
I'm hoping that the pilots in Florida are much safer.
CNBC had a great story on how there is there are flying cars in Singapore now, and there are these companies that will fly you to work, and it's great. I mean, you look up and you just realize, wait a minute, there's something up there. Yeah.
And if that becomes too widespread, the skies will get very crowded.
Oh, yeah.
Because you can't exactly pull over to a cloud and wait.
And they're lower than most planes.
Well, hopefully.
Oh, yeah. Well, they are.
But there's a limit, and there's, how do you split that space? Because a lot of students are only 1,000 to 1,500 feet up. They're not that high. That might sound like a lot, but it's not a lot of room if you've got a bunch of airplanes in it.
Oh, yeah, I would imagine.
So I think there's lots of questions there. There's safety hazards with drones.
Well, and that's the one of the main problems with this service in Singapore is the advent of a lot of delivery drones
There's
that
always things that complicate.
cropped up in that country. It's like, okay, because the people who have the delivery drones don't have to file any reports.
Right.
Wow.
Yeah. So there's everything. Every good thing has its negatives as well, right? The world balances out. There's good stuff in the negative, and there's negatives in the good stuff. We are an interesting blend. So back to Passover, because we're about to finish it. Yay! Just a general comment out to anyone who's listening, who's in the listening area. We're going to be doing Yiskor, which is the memorial services. We can do those 4 times a year. Passover is one of the times. And Eitz Chayim will be doing it tomorrow at 11 a.m. We'll be doing Yiskor, and we will stream that as well, so you can watch it there. And, And we've got a third Friday coming in April. This is April 16th. And, of course, tax day this year was pushed off.
Till
May, thanks to COVID, which is a good thing because I need that extra time.
And so do we.
And, always appreciate that. And then we have our flower sale at the community center on Oroso, and that's the 25th of April. Come find some beautiful spring flowers. I've got some great stuff. And if you go to our Facebook page, you'll find our online flower sale. Some great things there. The prices are wonderful. Ooh. You can order different things, and they are starting to deliver to Florida. So if you order now, it'll come right in. And
oh, wow.
Yeah, I just got my shipment about 2 days ago from the stuff that I ordered from the website. Their prices are excellent. They do 100% growth guarantee on they sell bulbs and what are called bare roots or starts, and some really beautiful things. They've got a butterfly garden. They've got tree rings. So if you don't like to plant seeds, you can just plant this carpet, just throw dirt on it, and it'll bloom. They give you all the directions and everything you need. They've got herb gardens. They've got salad gardens, all kinds of great things.
So how did the Seder turn out?
The Seder was wonderful. 2J's provided the food.
Came through again.
And, matzah was had by all. And it was streamed and it was Zoomed, and there were a small number of people. We had 3 clusters of tables for groups that typically are together in the building, and it went well. People seemed to enjoy it, and there were a lot of requests for the charoset.
I'll bet.
Packages
I
of that
remember
went
that
home
from
with
last
people.
year. Yeah.
So it was a very good time, I think, and we're ending Passover now. So Passover will end either tomorrow or Sunday, depending on your tradition. Reform does 7 days. Conservative and Orthodox do 8 days outside of Israel. It's the day of the Diaspora.
All right. Why?
Because in the ancient times, it was hard to know the calendar. And so in case it was delayed getting word to you when the holiday started, people celebrated an extra day to make sure they got the right days in.
Okay.
And that's called the Day of the Diaspora. In fact, there was a great joke that went on the rabbi's listserv, and there's a cake called 7-layer cake. And if you look in and amongst the Passover cakes that are prepared that you can buy in the store, one of the things that's very popular is 7-layer cake, and it's kind of a spongy cake with chocolate icing, 7 layers, Doberstort. It's a Hungarian pastry, Doberstort.
Whoa!
And very often,
see the calorie count on that puppy.
Oh yeah, and some of the varieties have 6 layers because the 7th one is hard to see. It's usually caramel soaked, and it kind of disappears into the cake. And some bakers will tell you that it doesn't really matter if it's 6 layers, 7 layers. The important thing is to have a cake that holds together. And it's typically these layers with a buttercream kind of an icing. Ooh. You can make it non-dairy and then covered with something like a ganache. So it's a wonderful cake. It varies slightly depending how and where.
Mouthwatering.
Comes out of the Hungarian Jews. They learned to make that tort. And so the joke was, why is it 6 when it says 7 layer? And one of the comments was, well, it was really made in Israel. It was not intended for export, and so it didn't need 7 unless it was here. Yeah. Rabbinic humor.
Okay.
The diaspora layer. But it's because the 7th layer is typically soaked in caramel, so it's not as obvious to people. And caramel, all of those things can be made non-dairy, which is helpful for vegans, and it's also so that you can serve it with a meat meal for those who separate meat and milk.
What is the vegan population?
I have no idea. No idea. So we certainly have some in and amongst Judaism. The younger crowd more vegan than the older crowd. Yeah. Younger people are much more vegan than
More
older.
nutrition oriented.
Conscious, ethics to animals conscious, things like that. I think part of that comes out of the abundance of food, and people are not as scarcity minded, at least in the way of food.
Do you think like your kids, and of course I just hear this conversation on the bus every once in a while, they seem to be more tuned into the earth.
Yeah.
A lot more than
They're
we were.
much more organic than we ever were. Well, they've learned to do. They're concerned about climate change.
Yep.
Right. They have seen and they've heard the stories from their parents and grandparents about what life used to be like before we had so many climate upheavals. And a couple of things. Storms have gotten worse, but so have the fact that people have grown up and put population centers inside the paths of storms. And so storms are more devastating. But it's one of the worst. The Galveston tornado came right across what would have been Port St. Lucie, caused surge at Okeechobee, and went out the other side of Florida and slammed into Galveston, creating all kinds of havoc there. So there have been some monster storms historically, but we seem to be getting more of them.
Mm-hmm.
And there's all kinds of other things. I know that Venice is having some serious water rise problems. Some islands
Florence, Italy is like that.
Yeah, some islands are losing territory to the ocean rising. These are real, and the kids know it. The kids are, that kind of information goes out there. So we are obligated to do what we can for the planet. I think that teaching the kids about it, yay, matzah. I see. Okay, we're doing a great advertisement here for Yehuda and Israel baked matzah, which is what I brought in. Other ones are Manischewitz and Streitz. So there's a lot of different, and Yarden, and there's Aviv, and there's all kinds of matzah makers. So wishing everybody a great end to Pesach, to Passover. May it be sweet and kosher for you. For those who celebrate Easter, for whom this is Good Friday, may that celebration help you seek God as well. And all the other holidays celebrated this time of year, Ramadan, etc. Thank you, everyone.
You've been listening to Ask a Rabbi right here on WPSL, Port St. Lucie. Talk of the Treasure Coast, webcaster of the world.